Welcome back to Classic Books Deep Dive. Um, Today we're exploring a book that's helped, I think, countless couples navigate the complexities of love you know. The Five Love Languages
Yeah.
by Gary Chapman.
Yeah.
You've heard of this one?
Oh, yeah. It's a classic.
It's a classic. I think we all know somebody who's read it,
At least.
at least.
Hmm.
And it's had a big impact on, on relationships. So
It's been around a while, and it's still going strong.
still going strong.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. So the Five Love Languages, it's all about, how we give and receive love. And the idea is that we all have kind of like a preferred love language, a way that we feel most loved and appreciated.
All right.
And Chapman, he identifies 5 of these languages. And he says, a lot of the time, couples run into problems because they're trying to show love in a language that their partner doesn't understand.
Right. So it's like speaking French to somebody who only understands Spanish.
Oh. Exactly. You might be saying, I love you, but the message just isn't getting through. So Chapman's goal is to help couples kind of decode these languages and learn to speak each other's dialects of love.
I love that. The
Yeah.
dialects of love. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into these 5 love languages. What's the first one?
Okay, so the first one is words of affirmation.
Okay.
And so for people with this love language, hearing words of appreciation or encouragement, that's what really makes them feel loved.
So it's not just like saying I love you. It's
Yeah.
more about the specific words that affirm and validate.
Exactly. Yeah, think like compliments, words of encouragement,
Yeah.
positive affirmations like you're so talented or I really appreciate how hard you work, things like that.
Right. Yeah.
And, Chapman actually, he shares this really good story about a woman named Ashley.
Okay.
And Ashley's need for words of affirmation, it came from her childhood. She felt like she was never really seen or heard by her parents.
Okay.
Yeah. So, for her, hearing her partner say things like, I appreciate you or I'm so proud of you, it was huge. It was like filling this big emotional void.
Oh, wow. So that really makes sense.
Yeah.
If you grew up feeling emotionally neglected,
Mm.
those affirming words
Right.
could be just so powerful.
Right. Exactly.
And, I think we can all relate to that on some level, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody wants to feel seen and heard and appreciated.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's words of affirmation. What's the next one?
The next one is quality time.
Okay. Quality time.
Yeah. And this isn't just about being in the same room,
Oh, yeah.
watching TV together. It's about giving someone your full, undivided attention.
Right. So putting down the phone, closing the laptop, and really being present.
Exactly. Yeah. Putting down the distractions, making eye contact, really listening to what the other person has to say. And Chapman, he tells this story about a woman named Betty Jo. And Betty Jo, she was married to this workaholic husband named Bill, and he was always working late or on his phone. And she felt really neglected.
Right. And she craved that quality time with him.
Right, exactly. Like she didn't necessarily need fancy vacations or expensive gifts. What she really wanted was just those simple moments of connection where they could just, talk or laugh or do something fun together. Just, be together.
Right.
And so, yeah, quality time, it's really about making that other person feel seen and valued.
Okay. Yeah. I think we can all relate to that, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody wants to feel like the person they're with actually wants to be with them
Great.
and is choosing to be with them.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So we've got words of affirmation. We've got quality time. What's next?
All right. So the next one is receiving gifts.
Receiving gifts. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is about materialism,
Yeah.
right? Like wanting expensive things.
No. It's not about like being greedy or materialistic. It's about the thoughtfulness behind the gift,
Right.
Like knowing that someone took the time to pick out something special for you.
Right. So it's more about like the thought behind it
Yeah.
than the actual gift itself.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Like it could be something small, but if it shows that you know the person and you care about what they like, that's what makes it meaningful.
Okay.
And Chapman, he tells this story about a guy named Jim. And Jim, he really wasn't a natural gift giver, but he learned that receiving gifts was his wife's love language.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he started making an effort to, bring her little gifts, like a bouquet of her favorite flowers or a book by an author she liked. And it made a huge difference in their relationship.
Really?
Yeah. Because for his wife, Janice, receiving those gifts, it was a way of feeling loved and appreciated.
Right.
So yeah, it's not about, the monetary value of the gift. It's about the thoughtfulness behind it.
The emotional value.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's receiving gifts. What's number 4?
Okay, so number 4 is acts of service.
Acts of service.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this one is all about showing love through actions, like doing things to help your partner.
So for these people, actions speak louder than words.
Exactly. Yeah. And Chapman, he tells this great story about a couple, Mark and Mary, and their shared love language was acts of service.
Okay.
Yeah, and for them, love was about, taking out the trash or making dinner or running errands for each other. Just doing those everyday things that made each other's lives easier.
Right. So it's all about showing love through practical help and support.
Right, exactly.
Oh, okay.
And then finally, we have physical touch.
Physical touch.
And
Yeah.
this language, it includes a lot of different things like hugs and kisses, holding hands, cuddling, just any kind of physical affection.
Right. So it's about that physical connection that conveys warmth and affection and intimacy.
Exactly. Yeah. And Chapman, he tells this really sad story about a couple, Pete and Patsy, and their marriage it was almost destroyed because Patsy wasn't giving Pete enough physical touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he was always wanting hugs and kisses, and she didn't really see it as important.
Okay.
And it created this big distance between them because for Pete, physical touch, it was like this fundamental way of feeling loved and connected.
Right.
And without it, he felt really rejected.
Wow. So, these stories really illustrate how important it is to understand our partner's love language
Absolutely.
and to recognize that what fills one person's love tank might leave another person feeling completely empty.
Exactly. And that's where a lot of the conflict comes from. People
Right.
are trying to show love, but they're just not speaking the right language.
Wow. So that's all 5 love languages.
Mhm.
Words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. And we've heard a little bit about how these can play out in real relationships.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking our listeners are probably wondering, okay, well, how do I figure out what my love language is?
Right.
And how do I figure out what my partner's love language is?
Mm.
So maybe in the next part of our deep dive, we can dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about how to identify your own love language and how to start speaking your partner's love language more fluently.
Perfect. All right, so stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into the 5 love languages.
One of the things I really appreciate about this book is that Chapman doesn't just, point out the problem. He actually offers solutions.
Right.
He gives us like a roadmap for how to actually learn to speak each other's love languages.
Yeah. That's what I love about this book, too. It's not just theory. It's very practical advice. So, okay, let's get practical then. How can we become more fluent in each of these love languages? Let's start with words of affirmation.
Yeah, so with words of affirmation, it really starts with just being more mindful of our words. Like instead of just thinking, oh, my partner looks great in that new outfit, actually say it out loud.
Right. So don't just notice it, verbalize it.
Exactly. And it sounds so simple, but those words, they can have such a huge impact.
And it's not just about, like, grand declarations of love, right? It's also about those small, everyday affirmations.
Right. Exactly. Like saying thank you for making coffee.
Yeah.
Or acknowledging how well they handled a stressful situation. Those little things can make a big difference.
Right. Okay. What about quality time? How can we become more fluent in that language?
So with quality time, it's all about being present, both physically and mentally. Putting aside those distractions, making eye contact, really listening to what the other person has to say.
So no more scrolling through our phones while our partner's trying to tell us about their day.
Right. Put those phones away. Give them your full attention. Ask questions. Show that you're genuinely interested. And remember, quality time isn't just about talking. It's also about creating those shared experiences.
So things like cooking dinner together, going for a walk, working on a project together, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's about those moments that you share together that create those lasting memories and really strengthen your bond.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's move on to receiving gifts. I have to admit, this is one that I sometimes struggle with. I'm not always the best gift giver.
Well, Chapman says it's not about spending a fortune or finding the perfect present. It's really about the thought behind the gift.
Okay, so it's more about paying attention to their hobbies and passions than trying to find the most expensive or extravagant gift.
Right. A small, thoughtful gift can mean so much more than a lavish and personal one.
Right, so it could be like a book by their favorite author or a small item that reminds you of a shared memory.
Exactly. Or even just a handwritten card expressing your appreciation. It's the gesture that speaks volumes.
Right, okay. What about acts of service? How do we become more fluent in that love language?
So for people whose love language is acts of service, actions really do speak louder than words. It's about showing your love through practical help and support.
Okay, so like taking on a chore that they hate, fixing something that's broken, running an errand for them, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, anticipating their needs, and showing them you care by trying to make their life a little bit easier.
Okay. And finally, how can we become more fluent in the language of physical touch?
So physical touch, it can encompass a lot of different things. From a quick hug to a passionate kiss, it's really about incorporating those loving touches into your everyday interactions.
Okay, so it's not just about sexual intimacy.
No, not at all. It's about those small gestures like a shoulder rub after a long day or holding hands while you're watching a movie. Just those little things that communicate warmth and affection and connection.
Okay, it's about being physically present and affectionate in a way that makes your partner feel loved and cherished.
Exactly. And of course, for many couples, sexual intimacy is a very important part of their relationship. And Chapman emphasizes that this aspect of physical touch should be approached with open communication and understanding and a willingness to meet each other's needs and desires.
Okay, so we've covered the 5 love languages and how to speak each one more fluently. What other insights does Chapman offer for building stronger relationships?
Well, he emphasizes that learning these love languages is just the beginning. It's a starting point, not the final destination.
Right, so it's not a one-time fix. It's about like continuously nurturing the relationship.
Exactly. And, our needs and desires, they can change over time. What filled your partner's love tank 5 years ago might not have the same impact today.
Right.
So it's important to stay curious, check in regularly, and continue to learn how to love each other better.
So communication is key. We need to talk to each other, express our needs, and be open to feedback.
Absolutely. And Chapman also stresses the importance of forgiveness. We're all human, we make mistakes. It's inevitable that we'll hurt our partner at times, even unintentionally.
Especially when we're speaking different love languages.
Exactly. But learning to forgive those hurts, both big and small, is so essential for maintaining a healthy and loving relationship.
Right. It's about letting go of that resentment and choosing to move forward together.
Exactly.
I love this whole concept of love languages. It's so insightful. It gives us a really practical framework for understanding our own needs and the needs of our loved ones.
Yeah, it's a really powerful tool for building stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
Okay. So in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore some of the potential challenges and criticisms of this approach and how we can navigate them effectively. Okay, so we've spent the last couple parts, talking about all the ins and outs of the 5 love languages.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, it seems like it's been a really helpful book for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also wondering if there have been criticisms of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been really popular, and I think for a lot of people it's really helpful, but it's not perfect. There are definitely some criticisms.
Okay. So what are some of those criticisms?
Well, one of the biggest ones is that, it kind of oversimplifies things.
Okay. How so?
Like boiling down love to just 5 categories. I mean, love is so complex. Can you really capture all of that with just 5 things?
Right. So it's like, are those 5 love languages enough?
Yeah. And, even Chapman himself, he says, it's just a starting point. It's not like the be-all, end-all.
Okay. So it's more about just kind of like identifying the main ways that we experience love.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. What are some other criticisms?
Another one is that, the book is really focused on romantic relationships. And, obviously those are really important. But people have lots of different kinds of relationships in their lives.
Right. What about, like, friendships?
Yeah.
Or family relationships? Or even work relationships?
Right, exactly.
Could these love languages be applied to those too?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, Chapman has written other books about that.
Oh, it's
So, like, there's the 5 love languages of children and the 5 love languages of the workplace. So, yeah, you can definitely apply those principles to other kinds of relationships.
Interesting. Okay. Any other criticisms?
Another one is that sometimes the book can feel a little bit formulaic.
Oh.
Like it's kind of like just follow these steps, speak the right love language, and everything will be perfect.
Right. But relationships aren't like that.
Exactly.
They're messy and they're complicated.
Right. And you can't just reduce them to a formula.
Yeah.
And that's why, even if you understand love languages, it's still really important to keep communicating and to keep adjusting because things change. People change.
Right. Right. So it's more about like the ongoing process than just like checking off a box.
Exactly.
Okay. Another criticism that I've heard is that, focusing too much on these categories could actually make love feel less genuine. Like it becomes more about keeping score.
Right.
Like, I did the dishes, so now you owe me a back rub.
Right. Yeah. And that totally misses the point.
Exactly. Because real love, it's not about keeping score. It's about giving freely
Yeah.
and just wanting to make the other person happy.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that, people can have more than one love language.
Right.
And their love language can even change over time.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, it's not about like putting people in a box. It's more about just being aware of these different ways that people experience love.
Right. And being flexible and adaptable.
Exactly.
Okay. So I guess the question is, where does this leave us?
Yeah.
We've talked about all these love languages. We've talked about some of the criticisms. What's the takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that communication is key.
Okay.
Take the time to understand your own needs and desires. And take the time to understand your partner's needs and desires.
Okay.
Talk to each other. Be honest about how you feel most loved and appreciated.
And it's not always about, those big, grand gestures. Sometimes it's the small things,
Exactly.
like just saying thank you or giving someone a hug.
Right. It's those little everyday things that can make a big difference.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too.
Yeah. So any final thoughts?
Just, keep those love tanks full and keep the conversation going.
I love it. Keep those love tanks full. All right. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the 5 love languages by Gary Chapman. Thank you so much for listening. And we'd love to hear from you. What resonated with you? What challenges have you experienced in your own relationships? You can share your thoughts on social media or through our website. Until next time, happy reading and even happier loving.